My mother is sick and needs urgent surgery. Sell your car, my husband sobbed into the phone, and I believed him. I grabbed the documents and rushed to finalize the deal, but something in his voice, his panicked haste, and the way he avoided details alerted me. I went to the hospital to check, and what I learned from a classmate who worked there changed my whole life. Elena was sitting at the computer, sorting through quarterly reports, when the phone rang. Her husband's name appeared on the screen. Pavel rarely called during business hours. She picked up the phone and heard sobbing. Mom is dying. Urgent surgery is needed. Sell your car. I've already found a buyer. I'll pay you back later. Pavel's voice broke, his words blending into one continuous groan of despair. Elena dropped her coffee mug right on the keyboard. Brown liquid splattered across the white keys, but she no longer paid attention. Her heart was pounding in her throat. What happened? Where is she? Which hospital? The questions poured out, but Pavel only repeated the same thing. He needed $1 million for an operation, a private clinic. The buyer of the car was already waiting. Elena grabbed her bag, yanked the documents for her brand new Toyota out of the folder, and ran out of the office. Her colleagues turned to look at her, but she ignored their surprised glances. One thought swirled in her head. I need to save Vera Andreevna. His mother-in-law was Pavel's only close friend since his father's death. The elderly woman had always treated Elena warmly, never interfering in their family life. The thought that she might die was unbearable. Elena got into the car and dialed the address of the private clinic Pavel had sent her. The outskirts of town, in an industrial area, an odd place for a medical center. But now was not the time for doubt. On the way, she tried calling her mother-in-law, a long ringing tone, then an answering machine. The subscriber was unavailable or out of service. Elena frowned. Vera Andreevna never turned off her phone, afraid of missing an important call. A pang of unease swelled in her chest. Pavel had said that her mother had first been hospitalized at City Hospital No. 3 and then transferred to a private clinic. Maybe she should stop there and find out more? Elena turned off the main road and drove toward the hospital. In the parking lot, her gaze caught a familiar blue Ford. Pavel's car was parked by the main entrance, so he was here, processing some paperwork for a transfer. She parked next to it and quickly walked into the reception area. A young nurse sat behind the counter, intently typing something on her computer. Elena approached, trying to control the tremor in her voice. Please tell me, is Vera Andreevna Sokolova here? She was supposed to be transferred to a private clinic today. The nurse looked up, quickly running her fingers over the keyboard. Patient's name? Sokolova, Elena repeated. Vera Andreevna, 72 years old. Just a minute, I'll check the database. The young woman studied the screen intently, then shook her head. No, we don't have that patient. Not today, not yesterday. Perhaps in another department? Elena felt the ground slipping from under her feet. How could it not? But her husband said... She trailed off, unsure of what to add. The nurse looked at her with sympathy. Lena Sokolova. A familiar voice made her turn around. A woman in a white coat with a short haircut and tired eyes was walking down the hallway toward her. Olga Petrova, a classmate from school. Olga! Elena rushed to her as if she were a lifeline. What happened? You look terrible. Her friend hugged her. Mother-in-law, stroke, surgery. The words jumbled, unable to form coherent sentences. Olga took her hand and led her away from the reception desk. Wait, which mother-in-law are you talking about? Vera Andreevna? But I saw her at Perekrestok an hour ago. She was buying buckwheat on sale. We even said hello. Elena stared at her friend, not understanding the meaning of her words. Like in a store? She's in the hospital. She needs surgery. Olga frowned, scrutinizing Elena's face. Let's go to my office. We can talk calmly there. She led Elena down a long corridor past wards and treatment rooms. The hospital smell, a mixture of bleach and medication, was nauseating. The head of the archives office was small and cramped. The walls were cluttered with folders, and stacks of medical records lay on the desk. Olga closed the door and gestured for them to sit. "Lena, I'm embarrassed to say this." She nervously shuffled the papers on the desk, clearly choosing her words carefully. "A month ago, your Pavel brought a teenage girl to us, and he was busy processing the paperwork like a single father." Elena didn't immediately understand what her friend was getting at. What girl? What does Pavel have to do with it? "She has acute leukemia," Olga continued. "She needs a bone marrow transplant in Israel, a very serious case." Olga pulled a folder from her desk drawer and pulled out a copy of her medical records. A photograph was hanging from a paperclip. A dark-haired girl with large, sad eyes, printed clearly at the bottom, Maria Pavlovna Sokolova. Date of birth, March 15, 2010. Elena Mashina did the math in her head. 2010. She and Pavel weren't even dating then. They only met 6 months later at a corporate party with mutual friends. So when this girl was born, he already had a different life. For the entire 12 years of their marriage, Pavel had another family, another woman, another child. Elena looked at the photograph and saw familiar features in the girl's features. The shape of her eyes, the shape of her nose. This was definitely Pavel's daughter. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from her husband. "Where are you? The buyer is waiting. Masha is dying." Elena reread the last sentence several times. Masha. Not mom, but Masha. He'd mixed it up in his panic. He'd named his daughter, not his mother-in-law. Everything fell into place with terrifying clarity. There had been no operation for his mother-in-law. Pavel had lied to get money for his child's treatment, a child whose existence Elena hadn't suspected all these years. Elena sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, clutching the girl's medical records with her trembling hands. The world around her seemed unreal, as if she were looking at it through a cloudy glass. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of life together. And all this time, a complete stranger had lived next to her. She took out her phone and dialed a lawyer friend. "Inna, I need to check on someone urgently," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "Pavel Sokolov, my husband. I need all the information. Children, child support, anything you can find." Inna didn't ask any more questions, hearing the tension in her friend's voice. "Give me an hour. I'll answer everything I can find." Elena hung up and leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. An hour is an eternity when everything inside you is crumbling. The phone rang exactly 50 minutes later. "Lena, sit down if you're standing," Inna began without preamble. "Pavel Sokolov is officially Maria Sokolova's father. Date of birth, March 15, 2010. He pays child support regularly through his firm's accounting department. The child's registered address was an apartment in the Northern District." Elena wrote it down with a trembling hand. So it was all true. Pavel really did have a daughter, and he paid her child support regularly. The money she thought was family money was partly spent on her other child. The Northern District was on the opposite side of town. Elena drove slowly, deliberately, as if delaying the final shattering of her illusions. Fragments of memories swirled in her head. How Pavel stayed late at work, how he went on business trips, how he was sometimes absent-minded and distant. The building turned out to be an ordinary 9-story building, as gray and faceless as thousands of others in residential areas. Elena climbed to the 4th floor and stopped in front of apartment number 42. Voices could be heard outside the door, a woman's and a child's. She rang the bell. A woman in her 40s with a tired face and dull eyes opened the door. She was holding bags of medication, lots of bags, lots of expensive medications. Seeing Elena, the woman turned pale and dropped her purchases. "Are you Pavel's wife?" He showed her a photograph. His voice trembled. Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm Sveta, Masha's mother. Forgive me. I didn't know he was married until Masha got sick." Only then did he tell her the truth. Elena silently helped gather up the scattered medications. expensive chemotherapy drugs, painkillers, vitamins, a fortune in those small boxes. Sveta invited her in, and they walked into the small apartment. On the walls hung photographs of Pavel and the little girl at different times in their lives. A very young Masha in her father's arms, a schoolgirl with a bouquet on September 1st, a teenager at a birthday party with candles on a cake. A whole parallel life, of which Elena knew nothing. A German clinic is taking on the operation, but they need 1,200,000, Sveta explained, sorting through the medical documents. We only have 200,000. That's all we've managed to save. Pavel said he'll find the rest, that he has a plan. A girl emerged from the room, pale, thin, with a scarf on her head instead of hair, but her features were an exact copy of Pavel's. The same eyes, the same set lips, the same stubborn jawline. There was no doubt. This was his daughter. "Mom, who's here?" The voice was weak, but there was curiosity in it. Sveta put her arm around her daughter's shoulders and held her close. "This is Aunt Lena Mashenka. Dad told me about her." Elena's phone was ringing off the hook. 47 missed calls from Pavel. She went out to the landing and finally answered. Her husband's voice was full of panic and anger. "Where are you? The buyer has left. Do you understand what you've done? Time flies and you're still missing." Elena listened to his screams and felt a strange calm. Everything fell into place. "I'm with Sveta and Masha," she answered evenly, "with your daughter." There was a dead silence on the line. Then he heard heavy breathing. Pavel realized his secret was out. "Lena, I can explain everything," he began, but she interrupted him. "Don't explain it to me. You know the address. Come." And she hung up. 20 minutes later, quick footsteps were heard in the entryway. Pavel burst into the apartment, disheveled and agitated. Masha rushed to him with a joyful cry. "Daddy!" He hugged his daughter, holding her close, and there was so much tenderness in that embrace that Elena felt a pang of jealousy. Then he looked up at his wife. His gaze was filled with pleading, despair, and fear. "I can explain everything," he repeated. "It's not what you think." Elena silently handed him Masha's documents. "Explain it to the German doctors," she said, "and there's nothing left to explain to me." Pavel took the papers with trembling hands, realizing he had gotten what he had started this whole lie for. But the price had been too high. He had saved his daughter, but lost his wife. And from the look on Elena's face, it was clear. There was no turning back. Like this video, so YouTube knows you're interested in video stories like this and recommends more high-quality stories. Elena returned home late one evening when the city had already plunged into darkness. Her keys trembled in her hands as she opened the door to her apartment. An unusual silence reigned inside, the same silence that comes from houses where life has departed. The first thing she noticed upon entering the bedroom was the empty closet. Half the hangers dangled in midair. The shelves gaped empty. Pavel had gathered his things quickly and methodically, leaving no trace of his presence. On the kitchen table lay a note written in familiar handwriting. "Sorry. Thank you for Masha. Your car keys are in the hallway." Nothing else. No explanations, no attempts to justify himself. It was simply a statement of fact. Their marriage was over. Elena found the keys where he'd written them. Her brand new Toyota was no longer hers. The papers had been signed. The money had been transferred. She sat on the couch and tried to process what had happened, but her thoughts were jumbled, unable to form a coherent chain. The phone rang around midnight. Sveta was crying into the phone. Her words tumbled into a continuous stream of despair. "Lena, Pavel has disappeared. He took all the money and vanished. I don't know what to do. Masha is getting worse, and there's no money for treatment." Elena felt a chill run through her. So he'd deceived not only her, but also the mother of his child. He'd taken the money for the car and disappeared, leaving his dying daughter without the funds for an operation. In the morning, she went to the bank, hoping to cancel the transfer. The manager carefully examined the documents and shook his head. Unfortunately, the transaction was completed correctly. We have your signature on all the documents, your consent to the sale. We cannot reverse the transfer. Elena called Inna and explained what had happened. Her lawyer friend studied the copies of the documents for a long time, then shrugged her shoulders. Technically, he hadn't violated any rules. You signed the sales papers yourself. Proving fraud would be very difficult. It meant she was left without a car, without money, and without the ability to care for her dying child. Pavel had calculated everything down to the last detail, exploited her trust, got what he wanted, and disappeared, bearing no responsibility. The next day, Elena went to see Sveta, but the apartment was empty. A notice for sale hung on the door. The mailbox was overflowing with advertising flyers. A neighbor, an elderly woman in a dressing gown, came out to hear the noise. "They called an ambulance yesterday. The girl was really ill," she said, shaking her head. "And Svetlana was packing her things this morning, went somewhere saying she couldn't live here anymore." Elena found a note addressed to her in the mailbox. Pavel took all the money and disappeared. "Masha is in the children's hospice on Sadovaya. Sorry for dragging you into this, Sveta." The handwriting was uneven, the letters blurred by tears. The children's hospice was located in an old building on the outskirts of the city. Elena searched for a long time for the right room, wandering through long corridors with faded wallpaper. The smell of medicine and disinfectant was nauseating. Masha was lying on an IV, pale and emaciated. Seeing Elena, the girl smiled weakly. "Aunt Lena, Dad said that you would help us." Her voice carried a childish faith that adults would always find a way out of any situation. The attending physician, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, took Elena aside. "She has a month at most without surgery," he said quietly. "We're doing everything we can, but our options are limited. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and that can only be done abroad." Elena took sick leave from work and began visiting Masha every day. The girl was smart and well-read despite her illness. They talked about books, about school, about Masha wanting to become an artist when she recovered. That night, when Elena was already falling asleep at home, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number, a male voice with a distinctive accent. "Your husband owes us a large sum. The debt grows every day. Either he pays or you pay." "Do you have an apartment?" The voice continued calmly, as if they were talking about the weather. "We know where you live, where you work. Pavel Sokolov screwed us, but the debts remain. Now it's your problem." Elena hung up with trembling hands. "So Pavel didn't just run off with the money, he got into debt with criminals. Most likely he gambled away the money on a car, trying to quickly get the necessary funds for his daughter's surgery. Now these people have come for her. She had an apartment that could be sold to cover her husband's debts. But then she would be left with nothing. No home, no car, no money." Elena sat on the bed and tried to collect her thoughts. Pavel had destroyed not only their marriage, but her life as well. He had dragged her into his problems and left her to deal with the consequences of his decisions. And somewhere, an innocent girl was dying. She realized she had to find Pavel and make him answer for his actions, not for herself, but for Masha, who believed her father would save her. But first, she had to sort out these calls and understand how serious the threat was. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Elena found Sveta in a small rented room on the very outskirts of the city, in a neighborhood that was uninviting even during the day. The woman opened the door, her eyes puffy from crying, wearing an old robe and slippers. The room was tiny. A sofa, a table, a refrigerator, everything was crammed into 20 square meters. Pavel had borrowed money from bandits for Masha's treatment, Sveta said, brewing tea in the only surviving cup. At first, a little, then more and more. When he realized he couldn't pay it back, he went to the casino. He thought he'd win it back quickly, but he lost even more. Then he borrowed again to win it back. Now he owes $3 million. Sveta raised the cup to her lips with trembling hands. They said that if he didn't find the money, they would come for us, for me and Masha. Elena listened and understood. They were both victims of the same man. Pavel had ruined not only her life, but also the mother of his child. He used them both, manipulated their emotions, and when everything collapsed, he simply ran away. Only together can we save Masha and find Pavel, Elena said, and Sveta nodded. They had no choice. Either they united against a common enemy, or they would lose everything they held dear. The next day, Elena met with Inna again. A lawyer friend spent a long time poring over documents, making phone calls, and checking legal codes. Finally, she raised her head, hope in her eyes. "There's a loophole," she said. "If you can prove Pavel misled you when selling the car, the transaction can be contested. You need proof that he deliberately lied about your mother-in-law's illness." Elena and Sveta set about gathering evidence. They went to the hospital, where Olga helped them obtain a certificate stating that Vera Andreevna wasn't there. A nurse from the emergency room gave a written statement. Inna, through contacts at the bank, obtained transfer printouts. The money for the car had indeed gone to the casino, but that wasn't enough. They needed more compelling evidence, documents that would unequivocally prove deliberate fraud. Sveta suddenly remembered something important. "Pavel has a secret hiding place in his brother's garage," she said. "He thinks I don't know, but I saw him hide something there. Maybe there's something useful there." The garage was in an old co-op building outside the city. Pavel's brother had gone away on a business trip for a month. The garage was locked. That night, the women snuck in through a window. Sveta proved surprisingly clever for her age. In the corner, behind a stack of old tires, was a small safe. Sveta knew the combination: Masha's date of birth. Inside were documents that made them both gasp in surprise. False sick leave certificates in the name of her mother-in-law, forged hospitalization certificates, promissory notes for enormous sums, and at the very bottom, a wad of cash with a note in Pavel's handwriting. For Masha's operation. 800,000 rubles in cash. So he hadn't lost everything. He'd hidden some of the money here, perhaps as a last resort. Elena had photographed all the documents, and they'd decided to take the money. It was rightfully Masha's. But as they were about to leave, the garage door creaked open. Pavel appeared in the doorway accompanied by two sturdy men in dark jackets. His face was haggard and unshaven, his eyes filled with the despair of a hunted animal. "So we meet," one of the men said, eyeing the women with cold interest. "Pavel Sokolov, your husband and father, owes us a large sum. It's time to pay up." Pavel avoided eye contact with the women, standing to the side like a stranger. Sveta rushed toward him and grabbed his sleeve. "Your daughter is dying. How can you? You're the father." He pushed her away without raising his head. "I was trying to find the money. I thought I'd get lucky and get even, but it didn't work out. It's too late to change anything now. We need all the money here," the bandit continued, pulling a pistol from his pocket. "And the deeds to my wife's apartment. The debt is large. We'll have to sell the property." Elena realized they'd fallen into a trap. Pavel had brought these men here, knowing the women would come for evidence. He'd use them one last time, too, to pay off his debts. But at that moment, sirens were heard outside, and car doors slammed. Policemen with machine guns burst into the garage. Hands up, weapons on the floor. Inna managed to call the police when Elena didn't respond at the appointed time. The bandits tried to resist, but were quickly neutralized. As it turned out later, they had long been wanted for extortion and robbery. Pavel, seeing the game over, sat down on a box and covered his face with his hands. At the police station, he gave detailed testimony against the bandits in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her ex-husband, Pavel, recounted his misadventures, how he borrowed money, how he gambled it away, and his plot to deceive his wife in order to obtain funds for their daughter's treatment. Elena, in turn, presented the investigator with all the available evidence: forged documents, CCTV footage, and witness statements. The picture of the fraud emerged completely clear and irrefutable. The investigator promised to freeze Pavel's accounts and return the stolen funds, but immediately warned that the process would be lengthy, requiring court proceedings, expert assessments, and numerous bureaucratic procedures. And Masha was running out of time. Elena left the police station with a heavy heart. Justice would certainly prevail. Pavel would receive the punishment he deserved. The money would be returned. But what was the point if the child could die without receiving the necessary help? Sitting at home at her computer, Elena suddenly had an idea that could change everything. If official agencies couldn't help promptly, then she needed to turn to the people directly. She created a social media page and posted about Masha, a 14-year-old girl abandoned by her con artist father who needed urgent life-saving surgery. The story instantly spread like wildfire across the internet. People shared the post, left supportive comments, and donated to the designated account. 100,000 rubles were raised in the first 24 hours and another 200 in the second. By the end of the third day, the total had reached 500,000 rubles. Sveta, Masha's mother, sold the last thing she had left, her late mother's gold earrings, the only reminder of her loved ones. 50,000 rubles were added to the total, but they were still short of the 200,000 rubles the German clinic required for the surgery. There was only a week left. The hospice doctors reported that Masha's condition was deteriorating daily. The girl was barely able to get out of bed, spending most of her time sleeping under the influence of painkillers. Elena spent all her free time with her, reading books, talking about what their life would be like when everything was over. On Wednesday evening, there was a knock at the door. Vera Andreevna, Elena's mother-in-law, stood there, holding a small, worn suitcase. The elderly woman looked both confused and guilty. "Lena, I found out about the girl," she said, entering the apartment. "A neighbor showed me a post online. How is it that I have a granddaughter and I didn't know anything about her? Pavel hid the child from me all these years, too." Vera Andreevna opened her suitcase and pulled out a sizable wad of cash. "I was saving this for the funeral, for a monument, for everything that might be needed after death. But it's better for the child to live. 200,000 rubles. Everything I've saved my entire life." Elena hugged her mother-in-law tightly, and both women burst into tears. The required amount had been fully collected. The German clinic confirmed the date of the operation. In 5 days, Masha was scheduled to fly to Berlin, accompanied by a nurse. The final days before departure flew by in the blink of an eye. Paperwork, visas, medical certificates, an endless bureaucratic process that could have stopped them at any moment. But fortunately, everything was working out, as if fate had finally decided to smile on them. Everyone had gathered at the airport: Elena, Sveta, Vera Andreevna, and even Olga from the hospital, who had helped with the medical paperwork. Masha looked pale and weak, but hope blazed in her eyes. "Thank you, Mom," the girl whispered, hugging Elena and Sveta simultaneously. She called them both Mom, and the word sounded so natural, as if it had been meant to be that way from the very beginning. The plane rose into the evening sky, carrying with it the last hope for salvation. Now all that remained was to wait and pray that the German doctors would be able to do what Russian medicine had proven impossible. The first news came a week later. Masha had successfully undergone the preparatory procedures. Her body responded well to the treatment. 2 weeks later, chemotherapy began before the transplant. A week later, a suitable bone marrow donor was found. The operation lasted 8 hours. Elena and Sveta stayed up all night, waiting for the call from the doctors. When the phone finally rang, both women's hands were shaking. "The operation was successful," the translator reported, quoting the German doctors. "The transplant went without complications. Her body is accepting the donor material. Masha is in intensive care, but her condition is stable." A month later, a photo arrived. The girl was sitting in a hospital room, smiling at the camera. A fluff of new hair was beginning to sprout on her head. Her cheeks were pink, her eyes sparkled with life again. She looked like a normal teenager, not like a dying child. While Masha was undergoing treatment in Germany, Pavel's trial was underway in Russia. Elena attended all the hearings, presented evidence, and testified. The car sale was declared invalid. The money was returned to her account. Pavel received a 3-year suspended sentence for fraud, but most importantly, the court ordered him to pay child support until his daughter reached adulthood. Elena officially became Masha's guardian during her treatment, receiving full decision-making authority over her future. Masha returned from Germany 6 months later, completely healthy, with new hair and plans for the future. 3 women met her at the airport who became a true family to her: Elena, Sveta, and her grandmother, Vera. They rented a 3-room apartment together in a good neighborhood, close to a school and an art studio. On the living room wall hung a photograph of 4 smiling women with the caption, "Our Family," taken the day Masha returned. Masha had entered the art school she had dreamed of throughout her long illness. Her drawings were full of light and hope. She envisioned a future without fear or pain. Sveta got a job as a cleaning lady at the same school to be close to her daughter. Elena returned to her old job, but now her life was filled with new meaning. She was no longer just a wife who had been deceived and abandoned. She had become a mother to a girl who needed love and protection. In the evenings, they would gather around a large table, sharing the day's news and making plans for the future. Masha talked about school and friends, Sveta about work, Vera Andreevna about neighbors and television shows. Elena listened to their voices and realized life is truly beginning anew. Pavel called occasionally, asking to see his daughter, but Masha refused to see him. "I have a family," she said, "a real family that will never abandon me, and he's nothing to me."